Ooh, what did you make?
So do you know what a paper plane is?
Not the drink version.
Yeah. Let's see. I think a traditional paper plane is like whiskey, Aperol. Um, there's another liqueur. I guess I could look this up. Anyways, I have a spirit called Baijiu, which is a Chinese sorghum spirit, and so it replaces the whiskey. So, oh yes, traditional paper plane is bourbon, Aperol, and Amaro with some lemon juice, and it's all equal parts. And so the one with the Baijiu is called a paper crane because they're trying to be cheeky. And so this one has Baijiu, some Amaro, lemon, and Aperol. But what I also did was I batched the cocktail and did what's called clarified milk punch.
Milk punch.
Milk punch, clarified milk punch, where and you can do this theoretically with any cocktail as long as it has some sort of acid or citrus in it. Where you batch the cocktail, so you typically make a decent amount, and then you put milk in it and let it curdle overnight, typically in the fridge, and then you double filter it. So you and just use coffee paper filters, and there's like a lot of stuff that gets attached to the milk proteins and those hold on in the curdles as they get filtered out. And so what you get is supposed to be a shelf stable cocktail that you don't have to worry about the citrus going bad because usually fresh citrus starts to go off within like 8 hours probably. So and you get like a different mouthfeel, like it's very almost luxurious on the tongue. And so yeah, it's kind of fun. It was my first foray into it, but I think the I wonder if the Baijiu is too much because it can be very bright and forward. But along with the lemon juice and everything else, like this is a very almost medicinal herby sort of thing, which depending on how you balance it, is can be really good. But this is a bit strong on the medicinal side.
I heard cocktail and medicinal herb, so I'm sold. It's healthy. We need to drink these things.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's totally healthy
Vitamins.
for you. Yeah. It's got citrus. It's got fruit. I need to
Right.
be eating more fruit apparently for my blood pressure. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, all the
Milk
things.
though, so not fast friendly. So I'll have to wait till after Pascha. But
Unfortunately, yes. Well, does
which
it count if it's just been filtered through milk?
well, it's alcohol also.
That would be unfortunate. Yes.
Yes. But for Pascha, yes.
Hmm.
Christ is risen, the milk is curdled.
Perfect. I need that to be on a T-shirt, and nobody aside of the two of us will get it. But I really need that on a T-shirt.
Okay. So some friend of the show, please make Jake a shirt.
Oh my gosh, please!
So-
I'm a men's size large.
Welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, conversations with friends about stories that shape us and make us think, and some stories that are just for fun. We're busy people reading books in realistic increments. Follow along in the book and join in the conversation, or just sit back and enjoy. Our aim is to unpack the story and offer you things to ponder. Either way, thanks for being here.
Roxy, no, not Roxy. Clara. She had a really good line in the 6th episode too. I saved me by appealing to another person's humanity, not by killing them. When she escaped from Joe and Joe tries to
Yeah.
get her to stay, that was a really good line.
That was a good line.
So good.
Oh, Clara. Everything about Clara is just stressful.
So stressful. So stressful.
Yeah. But okay.
Let's see. Anything else?
I agree. I'm looking through my notes, and my notes are kind of sparse, and I feel like they were getting sparser the further on the series went. I think just because everything was blurring together into one maelstrom of like awesomeness or terribleness.
Not quite sure. Like I definitely like the first few episodes a little bit better, and these ones kind of felt. I think we're coming to a satisfying resolution, and I'm pretty happy about that. But these ones definitely just kind of felt like there could have been one less episode.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, since we're there, so for the listener jumping into the midst of our banter, welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, stories that shape us and make us think and inspire fresh new cocktails. Here we are boldly imbibing where no one has imbibed before.
Mm.
Well, Jake is.
I am.
I have tea.
What kind of tea do you have, though?
It is a mix of elderberry and rooibos, which
Ooh.
is a vain attempt to soothe the allergies. Yes. So for anyone who might be watching this on the YouTube, if my picture disappears and you see just Jake, that's me sneezing and blowing my nose like a madman. And if they get yelled, don't want to watch that. So
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. No, I'm
Yes.
just getting like, so I just got an under desk treadmill.
Oh,
That
nice.
is, I've actually been liking it. Like if anybody's been thinking about it, I highly recommend it. But the camera for Zoom, like I have a lot of Zoom meetings for work, and I wish I was really fast with my camera because I have fallen off a couple of times, and it's just really awkward to see me like jolt in the video screen, and it's kind of embarrassing. I'm getting used to it.
Yeah. That's really great. And I'm sure that people are getting used to it as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, I mean, this is the online world we've created for ourselves, so now we have to live in it.
Yeah.
There was a time, so I have my standing desk, my standing sitting adjustable desk. I paid extra money for the fancy
It's
button
worth it.
that goes up and down. Yes, so worth it. But I have yoga ball, and I ended up just taking out my bobble stool altogether, so just like sit on the yoga ball. And for a while, I also had a Fitboard. So I'd be bouncing on the ball when I was sitting, and I'd be like twisting back and forth on the Fitboard when I was standing. And I did have a couple of people ask me about that, and I'm just like, I gotta move, or I fall asleep. I'm like a shark.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Apparently, I walk with quite a swagger when I'm on the treadmill too, which is entertaining to watch myself.
It's your inner brute coming out.
Yeah, exactly.
Your inner John Wayne.
Yes. Please no. Please no. I don't need an inner John Wayne.
An outer John Wayne?
Neither, please.
A side John Wayne? A side of John Wayne, please.
An oblique John Wayne, yeah.
Okay. If you were going to make a John Wayne themed cocktail, what would be in it?
Oh, bourbon.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I feel like he's an old fashioned kind of guy, or he would be an old fashioned kind of guy. Like just a lot of bourbon, a little bit of sugar, and some bitters, and call it a day. I don't know that I could build a cocktail called.
I was gonna try to make some reference to barbecue sauce, but I don't know. I don't actually know much about John Wayne. Only what the anti-masculinity stereotype of him is.
Yeah, he's an interesting character to be sure. I highly recommend. It's definitely not fully about John Wayne, but it's often about it's much more about like the evangelical church in America and how things have gotten shaped by politics and happenings and things like that. But Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumenes, really really good, and it's an interesting like sort of biopic on John Wayne.
I think you mentioned that one before.
Yeah.
And really really appreciated it. So now I'm intrigued.
It's a good book. It's a really good book. It's a little depressing, but it's a good book.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, maybe sometime if we do a nonfiction run, that might be a good one.
That could be.
Yes. But anyways. So speaking of like highly exaggerated historical fiction, I suppose.
Yes.
Sort of. I mean, I think if I'm reading the Amazon Prime side notes, right, like the Nazi hunters were a real force, real phenomenon. Our characters, I think, are extremely hyper exaggerated.
Yes,
they're just like so extreme. So anyway, but if the listeners joining in, so this is the Amazon Prime show Hunters, season 2, episodes 3 through 6.
4 through 6.
4 through 6, correct. I can do math.
It's late. We don't have to worry about it. It's fine.
Okay, that's true. And we just had daylight savings time, so come on, people. We're still sleep deprived. So anyway, so a brief narration. I'll brief it and you can add to it, I suppose. So like we said, last we left off, so it's our hunters got a lead that Hitler was still alive in Argentina, and they were all flocking down there to try to mete out their own justice. And they were hunting down his special agents to try to find where he is. And right at the end, so Jonah Heidelbaum, our main character, he had a girlfriend, and he told her his name was Sam. So that's just bad juju right from the start. So she figured out that he had a secret life and followed them to Argentina. And I think that was where episode 3 ended, is her calling him a two-timer and like catching him in the hotel in Argentina, like barely missing the gun in his pants, and she's angry. And so from there, I think where we go. So there's this whole Jonah Clara. Clara is the angry girlfriend. There's this whole Jonah Clara arc where he tries to persuade her that he's a lovable, honest guy and she can trust him. Rightfully so. She doesn't believe him. Somewhere in there, she gets kidnapped. And subsequent, and I was so there's a scene coming up where it would have been her time to die. Spoilers: she didn't die, which may or may not have spoiled the show. But sorry. No,
I hope that you're not listening to us like instead of the show, because the show's pretty entertaining. Please don't let us spoil the show for you.
Oh no, you should go watch the show. It's some good entertainment value. It's kind of grisly and kind of violent and everything. Yeah, so there's that. Meanwhile, that's kind of in the foreground. There's a moment where I'm kind of remembering this just in like scattered moments, because so again, like, so the main thrust of it is the bulk of the hunters team, they go on the side quest to rescue Clara, which ends up taking them closer to where Hitler is, because along the way they run into Joe. Joe was once part of their team, got kidnapped and brainwashed by Hitler, and then he came back, killed George. Poor George. Headshot.
Poor George.
Wonderfully done. Yes. Elevator shot. It was very it reminded me of, like, what was it? I think it was like The Forsaken with Leo DiCaprio, Mark Wahlberg, and others. And there's like 5 headshots in a short sequence in that movie, and it's pretty intimidating. Anyway, so Joe comes back, he kills George, he shoots Roxy in the shoulder, and so everybody's scared and mad at him. And so then Lonnie rushes her to the hospital, and he's taking care of her. Joe and Travis follow the hunters out into the desert, and then they have a showdown, and from there they go on their last leg into where Hitler's compound is, and manage to get into it. And through a sequence of fun drama and excitement and choreography, they do manage to secure the package. They do, well, Jonah anyway. He walks out of the compound with Hitler in chains. And that's, I believe, where episode 6 ends. If I recall the big story.
Yeah.
Yes. And I know there's like a lot of other like little plot points in there, but what were some of those that you find particularly significant?
Oh, well, I mean, like starting in episode 4, there was a lot of themes around addiction, both to a substance and like to a cause. We see Lonnie's addiction to cocaine being kind of mirrored with Jonah and Chava and many of the hunters' addiction to this cause. Like they cannot give it up. And we see that we see that Lonnie's addiction potentially costs them a really big move, and they're able to kind of fix the situation. But like it goes through Lonnie having this kind of breaking moment and realizing that like Meyer, who got him out of this cheesy acting scene to do something like greater or better, ended up being a fraud. And he has this sort of crisis, almost a crisis of faith, of like, this person who brought me into all of this was a fraud. So what does any of this matter? And it really breaks him, which I think is a really interesting topic to deal with around like many sorts of ideas, right? Like faith or whatever. I think we've all had that person that we looked up to, and then we look behind the curtain a little bit, and hopefully they're not actually a Nazi who killed a whole bunch of people. That would be bad. But like we often look behind the curtains and we can see in our heroes or our mentors or whatever that they're not who we thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
And that can, like, what does that mean for all of the things that they brought you through? What does that mean for all of the work that you did kind of because of them, if not for them? I think is a really interesting question to deal
That's a really
to
interesting
wrestle with.
question. Really, really useful, practical. Like, so some terms that come to mind for that. So intergenerational trauma, it seems like a proximal concept. The epigenetic inheritance,
Mhm.
seems like a concept. Legacy, sins of the fathers, things like that. And there's a way, yeah, grappling with this realization of like where I come from, who my ancestors are. I think it is a really important thing because I might so in my family line, I don't think that there's like a Nazi history in my particular family line. I don't think. Um, I have a colleague though who did make that discovery, and as she was doing her inner work, and she discovered one of her ancestors was, and that was a really heavy thing for her,
Mhm.
and so kind of wrestling through, wow, this is part of my history, this is part of me. What do I do? I've had an interesting time learning a little bit about some of my ancestors. Um, so let me get the ancestry right. So my dad, my Lola, his mom, um, her dad. Okay, so both my great grandfathers on my dad's side apparently were womanizers.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
that sort of person, and it's been interesting, kind of watching how that's like popped up in little ways. I don't know that it popped. I don't know so much about like my dad and grandfather, but like all things like relational sexual acting out was part of my story for a little bit, and something that I had to work and grow through. And so obviously I'm not gonna like blame my great grandfather and say like, oh, my great grandfather made me do it.
Mhm.
But it is interesting to note that like, well, I mean, for me, like I maybe had inclinations this way that maybe those inclinations came from somewhere,
Mhm.
and then other things in my life and other choices made this a reality. But we get into this concept of like what we inherit from our ancestors, and like on another level, like saying like I've inherited a disposition to diabetes or something. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it is kind of an indicator that like, hey, this runs in your family, you need to actively do something about it,
Mhm.
or else it's going to take you over. And in this case, I mean, in the story, we're seeing depicted, a lot of like, legacies of violence and everything. So, um, and now I'm lost in my own ramblings
No,
because
no,
I
yeah,
like,
it's like it's interesting. Like there's that concept of generational curses too, right? And we see this in a lot of writings or whatever, and we often see it within scripture. And there's an idea, at least, and I actually don't, I'm not up to speed on the orthodox thought around this, but there's the idea, at least, that generational curse, uh, as kind of meted out in scripture, was something more to the effect of like, because you acted this way, your children see that because you have fed into this sort of this evil in your life. Um, you perpetuate it to your children, and it is so much more difficult for them to break that cycle because you have leaned into it instead of pulled away from it. I think I saw that a lot with my own family. um, like my dad and I had a very bad relationship, and a lot of that was informed, aside from aside from substance and alcohol abuse, a lot of that was informed from his dad and their relationship. um, and a lot of that was, from what I understand, informed from my grandfather's father and their relationship. And we see that in a lot of sides of my family. Like my great grandfather on my mom's dad's side, um, was definitely this very harsh and um, chauvinistic ish sort of a person for a very long time. And he actually changed and seemed to mellow in old age, at least when I knew him. But like I still see some of that in my grandfather. And some of that was also perpetuated by these ideas of masculinity within the church, and especially within the evangelical sects that we come from. And so, like again, it's those sorts of generational things. that are just hard to correct course and to change.
They are hard to correct and they're hard to change. They can be corrected and changed
Hmm.
though,
Hmm.
with a lot of diligent effort. And uh, what I've observed, so on my mom's side, so similarly, I mean, my mom to my grandma to my great grandmother, there's this history of um, it's a history of coughing at awkward moments.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a history of like a lot, a lot of anxiety, a lot of just like criticism, a lot of just like a harsh edge, and that's definitely come through. And that again, I'm not blaming my grandmothers for the way that I treat my kids, but I see that coming out. I mean, I have a leaning that way to be really harsh with my kids, so I have to be really careful with that. But I remember watching my mom make very conscious choices to do things differently than her grandmother did, and I would say my mom lacked resources. She lacked a lot of like altogether like emotional, relational, psychological resources.
Hmm.
But she did the very best she could with what she had, and it had an effect. I had a very different childhood, different sort of relationship with her than she had with her mom, and by the grace of God, I'm hopefully able to create for my kids a different relationship with me than I had with my mom, and hopefully that will continue. And so often when I talk with people about these things, they say, "Oh yeah, yeah, a generational change. It's a real thing. It can happen. It takes a lot of work. It takes a couple of generations for it to really kick in.
Yeah.
But I mean, you might as well be the change." And I think the other thing to really think about too is so I was referencing, some more unhealthy relationship things on my dad's side, but in the same track, my Lola, Lola Jessie, uh, yeah, my dad's mom, she's, a very beautiful soul. And, out of all her siblings, like she was the one who practiced love and forgiveness toward her womanizing father and
Ooh.
had a very different relationship with him because of that. And, she's the one who is like the locus of peace and connection in the family still at 92. So and that's also transmitted. So the way that an inheritance works, I mean, it's very complex. Like we do inherit these really burdensome things from our ancestors, and from somewhere we also inherit some really really great treasures also. And so me the counselor, where I see this as well. Late night bloopers. I haven't even had any alcohol. Yeah. I mean, as a counselor, when I talk about this, I mean, it comes with this idea of I'm going to do some reflection, get to know my story, get to know my history, get to know what are these different inheritance things, and then I have to make like active choices around what I'm going to practice more or not. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, and that's something that I'm so glad that my mom really brought up with me early on, in my life, like when I was a young teen, maybe a tween even. Um, I can't remember exactly what it was. I'd been going through a really difficult time with my dad and was really frustrated with like something that he was doing. And I like one of the big things was like, he kind of treated me like I was this burden. And not to get too much into that, but my mom, in the midst of like trying to be, you're still the parent and you're still like you're trying to figure out how to support your spouse even when you know that they're doing something that's really damaging. And she was caught up in her own thing, but when she one day I remember her turning to me in the car and she just said, "I know this sucks and I'm sorry. But one of the best things that you can ever do is to not simply just think about like what you're not going to do, but what you're going to do instead." And I've done my best to try and take that to heart. I wouldn't say that I'm very good at it, but I think it's one of the biggest keys in beginning to break generational cycles.
very very much so. I love that piece of wisdom. That idea of um, going beyond, oh, I don't want to be like my dad because I hate him, but I do want to be like whoever else is better, and and creates a really good thing. Um, yeah, it's if I'm noticing it feels maybe more intrusive to shape your life around something you add in than just take out, but it tends to be, I think, like a deeper actual change. So yes, here's to the wisdom of mothers.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nazis.
Nazis. Actually, one of my other favorite scenes in the fourth episode was this sort of like meeting the family sort of moment.
Yeah.
It was full of some good humor, and then of course like things take a really difficult turn for Clara. But so Jonah, like when they first start talking at the beginning of the episodes, he tries to like cover everything over, and he was just like, I just wanted to go, and I just found out that my aunt is still alive. I didn't realize it, and I didn't know how to tell you, so I just went off on my own, which seems like a really flimsy lie. But like, okay, we're going with it, and Clara kind of believes him for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jonah goes to Hava, and she's mad trying because he's trying to convince her to do this like lunch with her, because Clara's just like, well, we'll do lunch, and that's like the end of it. And she's waving this knife around Jonah while she's like cutting something in the kitchen, maybe.
I love
Uh,
her line. I'll make chicken. Jonah's
I'll
like, no,
make
I'll make a
chicken,
reservation.
and stabs the table. And just walks away. And
Yeah,
so she like plays up this very Jewish aunt sort of a thing. And it's like the dinner from hell that all of us like are worried about when we meet our significant other's family, right?
right.
I got very lucky. I don't know about you. My significant other's family has been like just super chill and welcoming and open, for the most part anyways. His dad and his wife are a bit of an interesting set there, but even then, it's like I haven't had the interrogation or anything like that, and this felt very much like that, like a parody on the interrogation of like the classic sitcom In-Laws, right?
Very much so.
Which was a lot of fun. And then of course, like she finds, like she goes to the bathroom and then finds
She finds the torture
this,
chamber.
yeah, which is not locked or hidden at all or anything like that. So then the story takes off again, and yeah, I don't know. What are your experiences with like meeting the relatives?
Yeah. So actually, I want to say my experience of in-laws has been really delightful as well, both ways.
Mhm.
Uh, my wife's parents really love me, and our kids, my parents really love her. And there's a lot of affection going both ways. Granted, I mean, a lot of our extended families are kind of like distant, so we're not like really
Sure.
caught up in like a lot of stuff, but it's been really positive. It's been really welcoming, so that's been really great. I had a lot of fun with this scene too, just because of the chaos factor, like the
Mhm.
relational emotional chaos. Yeah, you were talking about, I think in reference, so you were referencing the way, the other character, Lonnie, has to learn his hero Meyer is not who he thought he was. And there's this, examination of like the breaking of self, when one of your mentors turns out to not be who we thought he was. And kind of on a similar level, the same thing's going on for Clara, which, I mean, it's done in a really entertaining, dramatic way in the show. In real life, it's a really devastating thing. And then it kind of work with this like a little bit in my real life, where it's like, working with betrayed partners, women and men who have been victims of infidelity and deception and things. And it really is like one of the worst things that you can do to a person is to lie to them, and especially lie to their face. And so some of my clinical stuff is watching this play out and being like, "Oh, Jonah, you don't
It's a
do it,
bad
don't
day.
do
It's a
it,"
bad day.
and also be like, "Clara, run away, run away."
So
Uh,
fast.
yeah. So, because I mean, at this point, I mean, Jonah's a pretty good liar at this point.
Mhm.
I mean, he's getting desperate and everything. But you get to see how Clara, she really loves the man she knew as Sam, and she had a whole world and whole life built around him, and now she's seeing that torn down, and the result is like a shattering of self, which for her plays out as you know this kind of obsessive. I mean, we were like gently teasing her a little bit for chasing him across the world, and that is a kind of an extreme sort of scenario, but in real life, I mean, partners who have been betrayed or who suspect that they've been
Mhm.
betrayed, they do really extreme things. to try to get some sense of reality back, some sense of safety, some sense of,
Mhm.
well, what can I trust? I can't trust my gut anymore because this person lied to my face and I missed it. And if I can't trust that, like the most like the most basic trust experience is like I look at you, I make eye contact, you tell me something, and I believe you. And there's this intuition that should pass. And that's broken, like everything's broken.
Mhm.
So people who have had that happen will do things like they'll check their partner's phones, they'll check their emails, they'll follow them through town, they'll monitor them, they'll ask all of these questions, they'll go through journals, they'll do these things, they'll rage, they'll be clingy, they'll be subservient, they'll be distant, they'll be mute, they'll self-harm, they'll do their own acting out. And it's not because of like a weak constitution or anything. It's because this person's boundary structure has been taken away, and so they're scrambling for a boundary structure of some sort, trying to figure out how do I navigate this relational minefield, what are appropriate boundaries. And so there tends to be this really dramatic like trial and error of like, here's all of the potential options for how boundaries could be, like maybe really loose, maybe really strict, maybe really gentle, maybe really volatile. But it's the person seeking safety. um, then they may or may not have like a history of trauma or like codependency enmeshment or anything like that. They're just like, well, my whole world is shattered. I need to figure something out. So I'm going to do like everything I can do and try everything. And a lot of it's going to look unpleasant. Um, so I don't know. I had some sympathy for Clara. I mean, thankfully, I've never experienced that for my own self, but by proxy, I've been around some people that have, and it's no good. So I was kind of sad for her. I was also very much expecting her to die because it just seemed
Oh
like
yeah.
the way the show is going.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad that she didn't.
she
Yeah,
needed to win.
yeah.
Yeah. So branching characters, since we're talking characters. So in this showdown, so the showdown is, I think every character ends up, it's not like Once Upon a Time in Mexico, it's like Once Upon a Time in Argentina, this little tiny pueblo in Argentina somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And all of the hunters show up. Joe and Travis have Clara, they show up. And so there's this big showdown. It's really, I mean, I thought that it was choreographed pretty well, where like everybody's in the room, all their guns are pointed at each other, everybody's shouting like, don't shoot, shoot, ah, and like lots of curse words. And then Joe shoots Travis in the face. So, and that
Which
was
is
kind
so
of,
satisfying.
yeah. I,
I don't know. To me, it felt a little satisfying. They did a really good job at making you loathe Travis as a character.
oh, so good there. Yes, and I have a comment about that, but I don't know. I think I was hoping. Okay, this is my vengeful part. I think I was hoping his death would be a little bit more gruesome or a little bit more
Oh, that's fair.
exciting,
That's fair. Like a little bit more comeuppance.
a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, he was very caught up in his own glory in his own moment, and like he got shot by one of his comrades because he just like wasn't paying attention to that sort of thing. So that, I mean, that works in a way, but yeah, this is totally my vengeful, spiteful self. This is not my orthodox part.
I feel like we get at least a little bit of a pass since this is fiction. Maybe.
Since this is what?
Fiction.
Okay, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give myself a pass. I wanted more blood.
That's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. Yeah, it does. Yeah, given all of the pain and suffering and just insufferability that he dealt to the world. Yeah. Seeing something a little bit more. Speaking of insufferable, Hitler, holy cow. Like the most what's the term am I looking for? Chauvinistic, manalizing jerkwad. Even to Ava, like I was like, okay, I know that Ava is this awful, horrible criminal, like who has killed so many and tortured many, all these sorts of things. But then to also like be dealing with this awful human being that's just like the best thing that you ever did in life was to marry me, I think was a quote that he had.
It is something like that. Yeah.
Oh,
He is kind of full of himself as he's like
so bad.
waddling around and going blind, and she does this
Yeah.
memory game with him and he gets all of the answers wrong. And that was just which we were talking about that, I think last time, like kind of the decline of Hitler. He's not this fearsome warrior anymore, and
Mm-mm.
he's there's decay happening around him, and it's interesting to see. Well, because we were talking about like the hunters built him up as a super villain, and they need him to be this extra dangerous villain to kind of justify their own obsession. But then interesting, we see him like getting humanized in this weird, like not really edifying way. He's like not so great, and the Colonel Ava, she works that into her shtick too. She's like, "You're nothing, but your name is something. Let me use your name, and I will build an empire for you." Which, I mean, I get her point, and she has a point, but it does seem like kind of a hard sell. Like, I can't imagine how she thought anyone would actually literally go for that. I mean, certainly
Yeah,
not
it's a
someone
tough
with
pill to
Hitler's ego.
swallow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just ugh, the sliminess of Hitler's character really shows through, and I think they did just a really excellent job at portraying him. And again, we see like at the end of episode 3, we saw that fear, that cowardice, and we see that again throughout all of this episode and next, where he's hiding away from anything that would come at him, and not even this ton of bravado, except for that scene with Ava. And again, it's like that classic bully scene almost, where you've got this person that you've controlled and manipulated and held power over for so long, but as soon as there is anything that stands up to you, you're broken.
Yeah. Yeah, he's portrayed as this really great bully, and it's kind of gross in a way. So the comment I was thinking about,
Hmm.
so we're talking about Hitler being a bully, and you were talking about how Travis is just really loathsome, and I would agree. He's written really well to be pure villain. Like a lot of times in, and I want to say this is becoming like a more rare thing in a lot of stories these days, is the true villain or the true hero, like the true evil or the true good. And for some people, there's a major critique of the trajectory of literature these days. We've taken away like the absolute good and the absolute evil most of the times, which on the one hand does make for a lot of really interesting characters. Uh, reference Ben Linus of Lost, or Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. These
All of
characters,
Attack on Titan.
the which one?
Oh, all of Attack on Titan also.
Oh,
Just
I didn't see that one.
no. Oh, it's so good, so gruesome. Oh my god, so
Okay.
much blood, but really good gray storytelling.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. And in real life, with real people, we want to do this. We want to see the gray and the complex, and here's the good and the evil interspersed in it, and we want to look for the good. But there's kind of a way, like in literature, there needs to be an absolute good and an absolute evil for reference sake. Otherwise, things can get kind of confusing. Anyway, yeah, there's a little bit of a tangent there, but I feel like, in a way, so comparing Hitler's character and Travis's character, I feel like um I kind of feel like Travis is made to be like the more evil character,
Mm-hmm.
in that the way that we read Hitler. I mean, we can't excuse him or anything that he does, but we could potentially interpret him as still working within an ideal. In his twisted burden way, he thinks he's doing the world a service.
Mm-hmm.
He's not, but he thinks he is. And so that in that sense, he's trying to like uphold like a value or a code or a vision of some sort, some gruesome sort. But with Travis, he seems to just like killing people. And he's like into the violence for the violence. And it's true. I mean, and this came out a little bit more in season 1, where he's like, "Oh, Heil the Fourth Reich," and he's like really excited about that. And so there's a sense where he's like kind of on the surface, he's into this cause, and like in the season, he's like into the Colonel also. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, the way that he's written and shown, I just see him as like, I'm angry or I'm violent, or maybe I'm not even angry. I just like violence, or I think I'm better than everybody, and so I just want to kill people, and I like killing. And so in that way, he becomes like the more evil than Hitler. At least Hitler had an ideal. So I don't know. What's your thought?
Yeah, definitely the spectrums of evil. Hmm, I don't know. I don't know if I would count him, like, if we put things on like a one-dimensional line. I don't know that I would count Travis as more evil, but perhaps a different kind. Because like even Hitler, he has this line, I think in episode 6 of like, um, you uh I killed so many more people than Genghis Khan. I guess it was episode 5. I killed so many more people than Genghis Khan, and they didn't even come to find me. Like, I'm going to do so much worse, right? Because there's this whole plot with a nuke, and then he wants to nuke like some of the biggest cities in the world. And so, at that point, I don't even know that it feels like he's trying to serve some sort of greater ideal. Travis is definitely much more self-serving. I will, yeah, that's true. So like maybe I don't know, different sides of the same coin, something like that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Interesting thought with the bomb because so he has a nuke and I forget the specific line, but he's talking about, or maybe I wrote it down. I didn't write down the whole line, but Hitler refers to Hitler refers to the bomb as real power, which I mean, short little tidbit there, but it brings in this whole discussion around, well, what is real power? And you know, Hitler, he's got this bomb. Hava, she wants. I'm gonna briefly censor. She wants his effing head on a platter. That's her version of power, et cetera, et cetera. Most of them seem to really like having guns in their hands, and that's like, how they do power. And like, there's no. It's all a very strength-based, violence-based sort of power, which is like one specific paradigm. And I guess we can see. I mean, here's a demonstration, a depiction of, well, when that's the running paradigm, that having strength and having power is accomplished by having weapons, having brute force, having the capacity to destroy and to rule in that sense. This is kind of what it looks like. Different than a gentle power or a healing power or a connective, like inclusive power. Um, again, referencing the Gospels. I mean, this is a major thread in how the Lord Jesus showed up on earth. Is he's in this political hotbed, and a lot of people around him want like the might. They want to overthrow something, but he's far more interested in, well, overthrowing Hades and destroying death, and that's his major feat. But that's outside of the material view. uh in the material view, I mean, he's healing, he's feeding, he's loving, he's changing people through a gentle invitation to change, and that ends up being more powerful because people want to do that. So
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, like bringing up that power dynamic of like the world's way of seeing power, I guess, and how I'm curious if you had the same sort of ideology kind of pushed at you as well growing up, of like there's the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. And I remember somebody talking about, like some leader talking about meekness and what meekness meant. And his idea was that it was that same old, I want to say it was not Teddy Roosevelt, like walk or talk softly, carry a big stick. Like you can't be meek, you can't have power, because to be meek is to have power, but to not use it. And I don't like that's not not remotely the case that we see
yeah.
it lived out through like the power of the Gospels. Like not discounting, but Jesus, of course, was God and man, right? And so there is that level of ultimate power, but it was still ultimate sacrifice. And yet we see in the lives of the apostles and the faithful that they didn't have power. They didn't try and build up all this sort of stuff and then just have like the threat behind them, I guess, or whatever, or just to be able to say like, ooh, I can do all of these things, but I'm choosing to help you. It's very,
Mhm.
it feels very self-serving, where meekness is true humility, and it brings the true, like that truer power of community, of, oh my gosh, I'm getting like anime vibes almost from what I'm saying right now, like the power of friendship. But like it is a thing. It's so a thing. Like there's so much power in building community and relationship. The power of change in lives that we see. like we've talked before, I think, about addiction. Often addiction can be countered by just getting a person into real, honest relationship with those around them.
Yeah. Yeah. Addiction is dissociative. It's schisming. And yeah, it's easy to break up a community. Uh I mean, all of us have seen that. I mean, I would venture to say like just about everybody who's grown up, well, I don't want to pick just on the evangelical church because I mean let me
So
let's be
you're
frank.
good.
I mean evangelicals, I mean they've got their church list, but I mean nobody beats the great schism between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. Let's just say. Yeah. Uh 3 words. The filioque way. And anyway, but yeah, the power to heal, the power to bring together is huge. And yeah, and we see that with the Lord Jesus. I mean, he's primarily gentle, and we see, and yeah, I mean, we sometimes reference, oh, but didn't he like overturn like the money changers tables? And we could be like, yes, but his disciples did not. They did not carry on the tradition.
Mhm.
Uh, and many of the saints and martyrs, there's a lot of stories of martyrs like running to their deaths and like embracing it, or like
Mhm.
purposefully putting themselves in a position to be vulnerable. Or there's this interesting study of the holy fools, the fools for Christ, who like intentionally put themselves in situations to be humiliated because they're very very wise. And we see a really dramatic example of this in the Divine Liturgy today. There's this part called the Grand Entrance where all the clergy they parade through the church carrying the gifts, carrying the Eucharist, and it's a tribute, it's a nod to the Roman victory procession. And in this case, like the victory, the victor is the crucified Christ. The idea being like, well, when he died, when he suffered, when he went down the most was when he had his greatest victory. Because
Mhm.
in the upside down kingdom, in the kingdom of heaven, weakness is strength, through death is life, through humiliation is glory, and he died and defeated death. So we win. Um, but it's very counter to this idea of like I want to overthrow the government, or I want to like change all of society, or I want to blah blah blah. So yeah, all that to say. So Hitler thinks he has real power. He don't.
Right.
Yeah. Um. Okay. So some other fun moments. Actually, so thinking real power moments. So the Harriet character, Harriet, Rebecca. As a girl, she was Rebecca. She became Sister Harriet, the
Mhm.
nun with the guns. So she finally tracks down the man who killed her father and finds him. He's weak and old in a hospital bed, and she has this moment where we almost think he's a friend, and then she like pulls out the pillow to smother him, and she says who she is. But then she doesn't at the last minute, and it kind of the way it was written, I kind of get the impression she might have let him go,
Mhm.
um, which feels like a very good character development moment for her to not practice vengeance and again maybe just practice. Here's a different demonstration of power. Here's a different demonstration of strength. um that wasn't really talked about a whole lot, but it was kind of a neat balancing moment to the rest of the show, the rest of the characters. um but let's see, one of the other things I was thinking was I could maybe branching topics a little bit. So what's her name, the FBI agent, Agent Millie. Yes. So she killed somebody in the first episode
Mhm.
in Cold Blood, like execution style, and she's been just like racked with guilt ever since. And um, okay, I'm forgetting the line, but um, she seems to be wrestling with like, am I a killer now, or is this who I am?
Mhm.
And somewhere in there, I think she's talking to Harriet. Harriet will like make a reference to like, well, the person she killed, I mean, he was posing it. He was a bishop at the time, but back then he was a Nazi. And
Right. He
um,
wore a hat and a costume, but he was still a Nazi.
yes, yes. And in that, there seems to be this idea that his Nazism overcame his bishopism,
Mm-hmm.
and that was just like the dominant thing. And so in both of these cases, so it's an interesting, it maybe offers an interesting conversation on identity. Um, like, are you what you do? Are you the worst thing that you've done? Can you ever change? And I don't know. I mean, we'd be inclined to say, "Oh, Agent Millie, we like her. We want her to overcome her guilt and be someone different, even though she's killed somebody." But I would imagine offering that same sympathy to the bishop who was a Nazi might be a little bit harder
Mm-hmm.
for reasons. Um,
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and it's again is like talking through if for example Hitler repented at the very end of his life or whatever, like what does that mean? And I think there's a lot of theological talk to be had around that. Like I think we've talked a little bit before about the idea of like what we do still has consequence, and we still have to answer for many things, though Christ answers um, the ultimate issue. And so I think that's a very interesting question to deal with. Is like, yeah, like on the one hand, we have this woman who has done her best to do right for all of her life, and she had a moment of weakness or whatever in killing this bishop Nazi in cold blood, where like that Nazi, like he definitely wasn't repentant. There was no remorse. And then we also see Harriet's father's killer. He very clearly shows remorse, and she relents, and ostensibly doesn't kill him. It looks like he was already on death's door anyway. Um, so I don't know.
yeah,
It's an interesting question to deal with and to wrestle with.
yeah, that remorse piece, I think it makes a difference. I mean, biblically, we see this. I mean, this is why you know, King David is considered a man after God's own heart, even though he was a liar, a murderer, an adulterer,
Mhm.
a bad king in some cases, and had a lot of blood on his hands. But he was really remorseful. He wept for his sins, and he also like took ownership of things when he was confronted about them. Similarly, we could say, the Apostle Peter and Judas are often contrasted as both having betrayed or denied Christ, but Peter, he wept to repentance. Judas, he wept to wallow in shame and hung himself. And um, other fun reference. So if y'all read The Great Divorce with us, a while back, there was this brief moment where like the Emperor Trajan, I think, shows up in the Bright Place. This yeah, and this might be like a little bit fictionalized, interpretive, but it's a sense of like, well, even this really, really heinously evil person could have repented or shown some remorse, and yeah, Harriet's father's killer seems to show remorse, at least on the surface. So I mean, we get like 3 minutes with him in the whole show, so I guess they have
Right.
to act fast. But like this bishop, we could say, okay, so he was like doing different things, and that could count for something. But it could also be easy to just say like, well, I'm gonna move on and pretend things are good, and I'm gonna do different things, but I'm not actually gonna fix things, or I'm not actually
Mhm.
gonna repent, or I'm not actually gonna weep for my sins, or I'm not actually gonna like grow as a person. I'm just gonna put on a different face. So, I mean, yeah, that could happen too. So, um, anyway, but I guess what came up for me was this question of it was a question of identity.
Mhm.
Um, who are we as people? Which I guess that's probably the safer one to answer than trying to say like who is somebody else, because then we get into like judgment zone and we're not supposed to do that. But yeah, that was really interesting. So yeah, so here's a smattering of characters and plot points and everything. I mean, you'd mentioned addiction. Very overtly, Lonnie's addiction to cocaine. Definitely, we talked about Hava's addiction to the quest. Here's where I'll briefly get on my clinical soapbox and say, addiction is kind of a clumsy, improper word. I don't think we really should use it anymore. We should talk about obsession instead. Obsession and compulsion,
Yeah.
because all of these characters are just like obsessive over the thing that they're obsessive over, and they're really imbalanced people because of it. And look, some of them have died, so there.
Let that be your lesson.
Right? Don't do this at home. Yeah. So, yeah. Let's see. What are the high points? Should we talk about Hava and her
Oh
story
yeah,
arc?
this was a good story arc. It's it's tragic. Like we find out through all of her story that she was in the camps and she escapes and meets the infamous plague, which was a Nazi hunter during the war. And they escape and then they go off to hunt Nazis and they end up falling in love and he decides to stop and tries to protect her and she has this line. Let me see. I believe in episode 5. Oh yeah, you think love is sharing a life with someone? No, real love is living without them to protect them. Which I don't know. I would have contentious points around that, but you see this really tragic arc of like she's lived off on her own, away from family. We find through some of the flashbacks that like she had a very clear understanding of where Ruth was. Like she had apparently seen her place and knew that Jonah was her grandson and all these sorts of things like years prior. And so we see this character, this hardened character who is very obsessed and only going after the mission and is trying to find Hitler. And I honestly don't know what she would have done when Hitler is brought to justice. Ostensibly, we still have 2 episodes left, and it ultimately culminates in she protects Jonah as he's running after Hitler in this bunker, and they're caught in a bunch of crossfire, and she whether or not she's just acting to try and get him to go after Hitler and not worry about her or not, she says like, I want to be there at your wedding in a few weeks. We're going to be there. It will be fine. And then she ends up sacrificing herself for Jonah as he goes and tracks down Hitler. And it's this beautiful tragedy arc.
It was kind of beautiful. A little surprising but inevitable. So it's not disturbingly surprising. And yeah, it's a little hard to see if it was like character growth or if it was more she's just so committed to the cause and she in her mind is like, well, this is the next logical step. Jonah needs to be the one to do it. I still need Hitler's head on the platter, even if I'm not going to be alive to see it. So sure, let's get the kid in. But or maybe it's like she's softening for just a moment there at the end and able to sacrifice herself a little bit. But I mean she's that's her character. She lives by the sword, she dies by the sword or the gun, and she dies as she lived. So there's a consistency there. She's a consistently written character, definitely. But yeah, I mean the way that we could say she's an interesting study in attachment because like all of her attachments were broken and she had all of these stressful things. And so, when people go through things like that, we have to like find a way to adapt to life and get through life. And we'll attach to something, drugs and alcohol are easy contenders, like porn, food, anger, work can be things. In her case, it's this quest, that this is her primary attachment is to her quest to kill Nazis, and that sustains her. And here on the cusp of like, hey, this is just about done. She dies. So yeah, I mean, there's a consistency there. So it was kind of a good death.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, well choreographed and everything. Because I'm all about the choreography. Which is the hard part about headshots because they just happen so fast.
Yeah, and it's just done.
Yeah. I was, so like George's death got to me a little bit because it's one of those like he's such a nice guy. He's like the nicest, healthiest character.
Honestly, I think he was the healthiest character of all.
Yeah, and he had like the least screen time and like the most unexpected death, and that was just disappointing.
So sad.
Yeah, I mean, good for the story. I mean, it fit for where the story needed to go, and it got the emotional reaction from the audience and everything. And it was a good contrast because when we see Joe having, we demonstrate Joe has really precise aim. He can do this headshot. So when he shoots Roxy in the shoulder, you almost get the sense of like he did that on purpose, like
Mhm.
he purposely didn't shoot her in the head. Which thanks, Joe. But yeah, there's no warning. Oh yeah, Roxy, her arc is interesting too because
Mhm.
again, I mean, thinking that the really brutal strength versus the gentle strength, she's been this, super warrior all of this time, and then like right at the end, she thinks she's about to die. She's like, I just want to be a mom, and like, what about my girl, and everything. So it was a little bit. I keep thinking. So did you see Avatar: The Way of Water?
No, not yet.
None yet? Okay. So okay, I won't spoil that. So there's a mom moment in there that I'm thinking of, but y'all should listen to the podcast we did about it, and I'll talk about that moment there. So I won't spoil it for Jake. So Jake can still see the movie and enjoy it, and I want him to have that experience because I'm a good friend.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Well, so any other final thoughts, themes, fun moments for you?
I think like the ending for episode 6 was really solid. Like we see Hitler again in this state of absolute cowardice, right? That he sees Jonah catch up to him and tries to commit suicide with a gun, and Jonah doesn't let him. You don't get to choose how this ends. You need to be held accountable, and instead of executing him then and there, he drags him out, and we see this beautiful scene of like all of the Jews ostensibly killed within the camps, like they're all in prison uniforms, standing along the sides of this tunnel and following them out. And it's a beautiful scene, and like it feels very very satisfying. Like to just execute Hitler there is to cover over the crimes of so many that are still in place, and so to be able to try and get him out and then have him held accountable on the world stage, hopefully brings to light many issues. I guess we'll see.
I guess we'll see. Yeah, I know that scene. So it was really beautifully done. It was a
Hmm.
really well done scene. Really great idea for an ending scene, and just like this really sacred ceremonial. Like, we got him. He's here. This is actually happening. This is the moment we've dreamed of when we can like kill this man. So or bring justice to bear. And I don't know. I was having mixed feelings about the idea of it though. Is like, I mean, it definitely caught what they were doing, where they're saying, and like all of the dead that he killed now rise up to see him fall. Um, but I kind of wonder, like, okay, so are they saying like that makes it better, or that satisfies them, or that like
Mm.
heals anything, or like, I don't know. And maybe this is me trying to like come at things more from like a mercy standpoint, or like a mercy healing standpoint. But I'm like, well, okay, so I guess yeah. I mean, we could say it would be like just and fair for him to die 1,000 deaths because of or 6 million deaths or something. But I'm also like, well, but would that actually heal anything? Would that actually heal anybody? Or like kind of similarly, if if you hurt me, and I hurt you back. I mean, maybe I feel like maybe I get my anger out, and I mean that's kind of nice. But like, I mean, our relationship's still broken, and
Hmm.
like I don't grow as a person by following my urge to hurt someone. Um, feel like the Harriet moment earlier, where she doesn't kill her father's killer. Um, I don't know. That stands out as a really interesting contrast, because it's like her saying like, well, maybe there's more than just vengeance, or maybe I don't know. It's like she has the capacity to not go with her first urge,
Right.
and that feels really powerful. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, I mean Hitler deserves some pretty bad consequence for what he did, and I can't be the one to say what that is or isn't should be, but I don't know. I had mixed feelings over that scene. It was a beautiful scene, but now I've shared my mixed feelings, so I'm done. So cool. Well, I guess on that mixed note, on that heightened note, we will wrap up this conversation over episodes 4 through 6. And there are 2 episodes of the show left to go. We'll come back in a couple weeks. having figured out what happened to all of them in South America. And we'll bring you a report and many opinions and maybe some jokes.
And maybe some jokes.
Yes. We might try to bring you drinks if you were here in person, but
Go make a clarified milk punch.
Yeah. Clarified milk punch. No blurry milk punch.
No.
Only clarified ones.
Only clarified. You don't want a blurry milk punch. That probably
No.
tastes bad.
Definitely. So cool. All right. Well, thank you, listener, for following along. Please follow the Patreon and the Instagram and the Facebook, and join our community. Leave us reviews. Share this around with all people that love books and shows, because we love books and shows, and we'd love to talk with you too.
Yeah.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Word and Journey is a podcast by Moses Bernabe. If you like what you hear, consider supporting the show with dollars, reviews, or shares, or all of the above. Word and Journey can be found on most major podcast platforms and on my author Patreon at patreon.com/Moses Bernabe. Moses Bernabe can be found at mosesbernabe.com. Contact info for my most excellent co-hosts can be found in the liner notes. The podcast logo was designed by TJ Todd, with additional development by Moses Bernabe. The theme music is by Aaron Esparza. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.